Well, so you go after the dragon, and that's what this guy is doing. He's going after the dragon. It's threatening the society, because it always does. Chaos, what's outside of order, always threatens order. Always. Always. And so you have to step forward, you know, in this manner, voluntarily, and go after that when it's still manageable, right? And that's the case in your own life too. So, you know, if you've had a proclivity to be bullied in the past, you know, and you want to get out of that, what you have to do is you have to make yourself awake to the what would you say, to the initial stages of that sort of bullying emerging in your life again, that sort of domination, and you have to step forward against it when it's still in its developing stages, because maybe you can just not have it happen. That would be better. And so you have to be ready to speak what you have to say more or less on a moment's notice. You can't be impulsive about it. You know, like if you and I are talking and you make a mistake or I make a mistake, even if it bothers one or the other of us, we should just write it off, because it's like one encounter. What the hell? You know, maybe we had a bad night's sleep or something, you know. So you got to be a little forgiving. But if it happens twice, then, you know, you should be a little awake. And you should remember both times. And then if it happens a third time, it's like that's when you act. And you say, look, we talked and this happened, and I thought, yeah, whatever. But then you did it again. And then you just did it again. Well, then the person is basically like, what are they going to do, you know? No, well, maybe they might argue with you, but you kind of got them. And generally, if you just point that out to people, just like that, just that you noticed and are willing to say something about it, they'll back the hell off. They'll often apologize. And sometimes you even make them a little more conscious, which is like, hey, that's not such a bad idea. And that's what all this means. And so this chaos idea, so for Jung, it was the unconscious, right? It was the contents of your unconscious. And so that might be the unknown past, the threatening past that you have never dealt with. Might be the threatening future. It might be the threatening present. But Jung realized as he got older that the unconscious was also the world. And you think, and so the chaos is not only your unconscious mind, which meets the unknown, but it's actually the unknown itself mingled together. And you think, what the hell does that part? That's why the dragon is a land creature and an air creature. It's matter and spirit at the same time. And this sort of gets us into constructivism. Because the constructivists think that basically what happens is that you encounter those elements of the world that don't fit into your theory, and out of those new elements you make the world through your perceptions, and you make yourself by incorporating the information and transforming yourself. And that's how Piaget explains the development of a child. The child starts out with some reflexes, basic reflexes, and manifesting the reflexes produces results in the world, and then the child has to reorganize its perceptions to take into account the transformations, and so then it gets a little more sophisticated, and then it can do a few more things, and then it can manifest more changes in the world, and then it tracks them and modifies its perceptions and actions to account for them, and it just keeps doing that, and that's how the child boots itself up like a computer does. It's a very cool idea. And so from the Piagetian stance, so it's a constructivist stance, you could think of the world as a latent pool of information. It's something like that, with a structure, obviously, that you can interact with your little fingers and your body and your mind and your eyes and your mouth, and you make changes happen, and you track them, and you model them, and you build your skills, and as you continue to do that in the safety of your house, initially under the care of your parents who fill in where you're ignorant, you just emerge more and more competent and confident and ready to move ahead. So that's how the constructivist idea works. And so there's kind of a chaos idea at the bottom of that, which is that out of which you emerge and the world emerges at the same time. Because, you know, you don't see reality, not at all. You see almost like an animated version of reality, you know. Like when I look at you, I just see the front of you, I just see the outside of you, I see you at this height, I don't see any of your internal structure, I don't see the back part of you at all, I don't see your family, I don't see your history, I don't see your future. You know, I just see this slice of you. You're so complicated. I just see this little, like, oversimplified slice of you right now, and I think that's the reality. And it's sort of the reality, the way that a Simpsons character is you. It's like, it's sort of like you, and it's enough so that you can watch the story, but the real you, man, God only knows what that is. And that's a Jungian idea, you know, that the real you is something that radically transcends your perception of yourself or your conception of yourself, and that you get to that higher you, at least in part, by going into the darkest place. And so it's a hell of an idea, man. It's really, but it's the old idea of initiation. It's as old as time, that idea. And there's something to it, and we definitely recreate it in psychotherapy. Like, this isn't an airy theory. It's quite the contrary, because what you do as a psychologist, always, a behaviorist, say, the most logical, clinical type of psychologist, a behaviorist is an initiatory shaman, even though he or she doesn't know it, because what they do is they say, okay, well, let's take a look at your life. Like, okay, you got a bunch of problems, and they're like massive dragons, and you're just like, you're not going anywhere with those problems. You're just cowering in the corner. And what the behavior therapist does is cut that dragon into those little dwarfs until the dwarfs are small enough so that you can really kick the hell out of them. And so, by the way they do that is they take the problem and they decompose it into elements that are small enough that you have a reasonable probability of mastering them. So you take the problem apart into its micro problems, careful analytic process. And then you think, okay, well, how could we progress a little bit this week? And some of that is to practice facing things you're afraid of. So like if you're agoraphobic and you can't get on an elevator, you can't get on a taxi, and you can't stand up to your husband, and I'm saying husband because most agoraphobics are women, most of them are middle-aged women, and most of them were too dependent for most of their life. So that's a monster. It's like society, husband, elevator, taxi, subway. It's a monster, and it's that place you will not go. And that's because you feel this high and everything else looks this big. And so, and partly that's because you've run away, and when you run away from something, it grows and chases you, which is, well, it's exactly what happens to a prey animal, man. If you go in the woods and you find a bear, especially a grizzly, well, you're in real trouble if it's a grizzly. But if it's a black bear, you know, generally speaking, if you stand your ground and make a hell of a lot of noise, that thing will leave you alone. But if you run, well, what's it supposed to think? It eats things that run from it. So that's exactly where that idea come from. You turn tail and run, and then the thing that you're afraid of is really a monster, and it's going to like get you and eat you. It's like, well, that's true psychologically as well. And the same circuits that we used to, when we were, you know, out in the forest, even in trees, the same circuits that we used to parse up the world then into safe territory and place where the predators loom, is the way we parse up the world now, which is safe territory and the place where the predators loom. It's just become abstracted way up, So, but it's the same damn circuits. We know this. Like the same circuits you use to forage for information, which is dopaminergic circuit, is the circuit that squirrels use to forage for nuts. And you think, well, why? Well, it's because there's no difference between information and food. Like you trade information for food all the time. That's what you're doing when you're working, especially if you're working on a computer. So the idea that there's an equation between information and food, it's like, well, obviously there's an equation between them. So of course you'd use the same circuits. And I mean, the damn squirrel has to remember where the nuts are. And so for him, information is food even. So and what happened to human beings is that we started thinking, hey, maybe it's better to go after information than it is to go after food, because going after information produces more food than just going after food. And so that was a pretty damn smart idea, and so we're still doing that. So anyways, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And this is what behavior therapists do. They decompose your problems. What are you afraid of? Well, okay, you're afraid of everything. Well, let's get something specific you're afraid of. Well, I'm afraid of an elevator. Okay, an elevator. So I have a client, she's afraid of elevators. The elevator door opens, she goes, that's a tomb. And I thought, oh, wow, I thought it was an elevator. But for you, it's not a bloody elevator. It's death. And so that's what you're afraid of. It's worse than that. You're afraid of being trapped inside there in the dark alone, not knowing if anyone is going to rescue you, stuck there with your damn imagination, freaking out. It's like, and if that's not, and then maybe you have a heart attack because you're so terrified and you die. It's like, you know, so that's the elevator. Well, it's no bloody wonder that no one's going to get into something like that. And then maybe underneath that is your distrust in the mechanisms of society, right? Because, you know, a normal person, those weird creatures, they'll get an elevator, what the hell, they don't care. And partly it's because they have an implicit belief, even if the thing stops, somebody will come along and rescue them. And usually you don't even think about it, right? It's like, oh, what the hell, it's an elevator. It's like, the danger is invisible to you. And it's partly because you implicitly trust the structure. And so maybe you go into the unconscious presuppositions of the person who is terrified of the elevator and the subways, and you find out they have a real problem with trusting authority, and that's partly why they don't get along with their husband and why they've never been able to stand up for themselves. So then you say, okay, well, you're afraid of the damn elevator, but it's not an elevator, it's a tomb, and the tomb is partly you and it's partly the elevator and partly your unconscious mind. And so, well, what can you handle? Can you go and look at an elevator from 10 feet away? It's like, yes. Okay. How about 9 feet away? Yes. 5 feet? Yes. 4 feet? No. Okay, no problem. 4.5 feet. We're going to go from that elevator and we're going to look at the damn thing until you're bored of it. Because that's what we're trying to, you should be bored of the elevator. Because then you're not afraid of it, obviously. It's like, it's an elevator. You just don't notice it, right? All these things around here that you don't notice, I'd take you out of here and ask you what color the walls are. You haven't got any idea. You know, I suspect for most of you, there's not a chance you'd be able to identify the gender of the person who's sitting next to you, unless you know them. It's like, you just don't remember anything. And why should you? Everything works. Like, you don't have to pay attention to it. It's like, is that staying up? Yeah, it's still up. Yeah, still up. Still up. I was like, really? No. No, you get bored of that real quick, and so then you just ignore it. But the agoraphobic has had that veil of ignorance torn away, and what they see behind it is mortal threat, and so that's really what you're helping them deal with. And so this week they're 4.5 feet from the elevator, next week they're a foot from the elevator, and the week after that the horrible gates of hell open and they look inside and they don't run, and so hey, they're tougher than they thought they were. And that's what you're teaching them, actually. You're not teaching them that the world isn't dangerous, because that's a stupid thing to teach someone. Bloody right, the world is dangerous. It's terrifying. And sometimes people they realize that, and the veil lifts, and they see horror everywhere. They see that, and then they think, well, I'm just a little rabbit. I'm over here in the corner. I can't move. I'm petrified. And then they can't move. They hide at home. They cower at home, because everything has become a predatory domain. And so what you teach them is, you're not as much of a rabbit as you think. And part of that is that you help them grow some teeth so that they can go home and have that fight with their husband that they should have had 25 years ago. And it happens very frequently with agoraphobic clients, that you get them so they can go on the damn elevator and they can go on the subway and they can take a taxi. And maybe they learn to drive. Wow. They get some autonomy, and then they're a little tougher, and so then they can stand up for themselves, and they go back, and like, their husband might not be very happy with any of this. Really, it depends on what sort of guy he is, you know. If he's a real tyrant, he might be just perfectly happy that he's married to someone who, you know, is afraid of her own shadow, because then she won't ever leave. And so that's a nasty little story, and believe me, it's not uncommon. So she gets tougher by facing what she fears. And what she finds out is there's a hell of a lot more to her than she thought. And that's really what happens when you do behavior therapy with someone who's agoraphobic. It isn't really that they get less afraid, it's that they get braver. That's way different. It's because brave is alert and able to cope. Naive is there's no danger. It's like, oh yeah, right, there's no danger. Jesus, what a stupid theory that is.